Hey guys, tonight we're wandering through some of the darkest corners of history, the medieval dungeon. Not the cool kind you see in fantasy films with dashing knights and roaring dragons. Nope. We're talking about cramped, dank, stench-ridden pits where the only thing you're getting for dinner is a generous helping of despair and the faint hope of not being executed. So before you get cozy, do me a favour. Like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I create here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and whether it's too hot to think or too cold to care. Now, dim those lights, crank up the fan for that soothing breeze, and get comfortable. And let's take a moment to ponder. Ever wondered what it's like to be thrown into a medieval dungeon? What does filth taste like when they serve only disappointment? Would you last a day grappling with rats where the only thing softer than the stone walls is your sanity? Have you tried to sleep on a bed of hay that doubles as a flea buffet? And now, congratulations, you've just woke up in 1347, surrounded by damp stone walls. There's a pigeon contemplating life decisions right outside your cell, and the smell. Oh, the smell is what nightmares are made of. Good luck. As you blink awake, the dankness of the stone walls closes in like a heavy fog. The light barely penetrates this musty fortress where dreams go to die. You're not sure whether the smell is coming from you or the actual walls, but at this point, does it really matter? Welcome to your new reality, where sunlight is as rare as a thoughtful king. You slowly push yourself up from the makeshift bed, a pile of straw that makes you question your life choices and possibly your sanity. It's dark, it's creepy, and the vague sensation in your back makes you wonder if you either have a serious injury or if the rot has finally taken hold. You take a deep breath and... what a mistake! The air is thick with a mix of sweat, mildew, and something your brain immediately categorizes as mystery. It's a smell that lingers like bad news, and shockingly enough, it's not the worst greeting you'll get today. You attempt to get your bearings, but the reality of your situation crashes down like a heavy stone. There's no view to admire, no birds singing sweetly outside your window, just the distant sound of someone moaning. Let's pray that's not you later. Rolling out of the straw, your feet meet the cold stone floor. Casual side note, in modern real estate, it's commonly advised to never buy a house without checking for dampness. A dungeon could be a case study in the failure of this advice. Your toes squish into something that feels suspiciously alive, and as you cast a wary glance downwards, you're not surprised to find a nasty little surprise, a rat. It squeaks, as if to say, "Welcome to my home." Now it's time to face the day, or at least what passes for a day here. The daily routine likely involves a lot of regrettable decisions, like deciding which corner of the cell to begin your morning ritual of dodge the feces. The logistics of finding a polite way to use the bathroom are more complicated than a medieval tax code. As you shuffle toward the corner, you wonder about the fine line between survival and humiliation. When did your existence devolve into this? Ah, breakfast time. You perk up slightly, only to remember that breakfast in a dungeon is more of a cruel joke than an actual meal. The menu includes yesterday's bread, which has likely taken on a life of its own, and a brown slop you hope is porridge, but fear is actually the remnants of whatever the guards forgot last night. You discover the bread is harder than your resolve to escape, and you somehow manage to pry off a piece without losing a tooth. The tasteless mush leaves a coating on your tongue that makes you wish you could vomit it back into the bucket labelled regrets. Since you're already in a predicament, you might as well make some friends. That corner of the dungeon looks oddly familiar. Ah yes, it's your fellow inmates, possibly contemplating elaborate escape plans or playing tic-tac-toe in the dirt. Everybody has their quirks. Some hum to themselves, while others rant about the terrible service in dungeons these days. One guy insists there's a rat conspiracy to overthrow the guards. Surprisingly, You find yourself nodding along. If the rats are planning a coup, maybe they'll take you with them. But just when you think you've gathered a crew, you hear the familiar sound of heavy boots approaching. The guards are on the dock this morning, and trust me, they're not the friendly type. More like the, I've had a long night of questionable choices and you're about to pay for it kind. You brace yourself for the morning lecture on the importance of adhering to whatever bizarre rules they've cooked up today. Really, you can only hope the day ends without someone screaming about the proper way to execute a brigand. As darkness settled again, the whining sounds of remorse and flickering torches become your only companions. The thoughts of escape seem increasingly impossible, and yet deep inside a flicker of something keeps you going. The hope that tomorrow will bring new horrors or perhaps a sliver of freedom. You settle into the straw for the night, feeling as if you've aged a decade, pondering whether surviving the day in this prison is heroic or just downright absurd. And with that, you close your eyes, all while hoping tomorrow offers more than just another round of dungeon delights. You might dream of the glorious sun only to wake up in the gloom once more. But let's admit it, this bizarre journey is probably better than whatever life choices led you here in the first place. Breakfast. You'd think a hearty meal is in order to prepare for the misery to come, but in the dungeon it's more of a cruel joke. Instead of crispy bacon and fluffy eggs, you're served a side of regret along with some damp bread that might just be sentient. Ever wondered how to chew mould while wishing for anything else? Welcome to your gastronomic hell. The bread, if we dare call it that, resembles a brick adorned with a sophisticated layer of fuzzy green growth. Delightful, right? You take a hesitant bite, and your taste buds cry out for mercy. Why is it simultaneously stale and damp like a regrettable squishy shoe? But that delightful question lingers as you choke down another bite. And what's this? Gruel, you say? Yes, let's not ignore the champion of medieval breakfasts. Rumour has it that it's made from water and whatever grains might be left after the rats have had their fill. Or perhaps it's the recipes passed down from a ghost who didn't bother to check the expiration dates. You can practically see the nutritional value escaping the bowl as you stare at it, contemplating whether you would rather die of hunger or a truly unique case of food poisoning. Ever tried to savour your food in abject misery? The experience is akin to preparing for a grand family meal where everyone starts fighting over the last slice of that dubious pizza. Except here, the only thing resembling pizza is the half-eaten mould fest sitting in the corner that still has enough spirit to complain. By the time you're mid-bowl, deep in thought about plotting your escape or contemplating your life choices, the guard wanders in, inspecting the rations with the same disgust you're feeling. "Eat up, peasants," he bellows, tossing a handful of something that falls unceremoniously onto the floor. You look at it, well aware that you'd certainly prefer to be the one consuming your own elbow hair than whatever that was. But duty calls, so before you know it, you're debating whether a scabby piece of ham has passed through the appropriate food chain to justify being listed as a food option. Meanwhile, other inmates eye it like it's the last rata in the dungeon. It's a messy circus of faces, all engaged in varying degrees of protest and defeat. Complaining about breakfast is strictly forbidden, but in a twist of absurdity, you notice some of the other prisoners launching into a satirical roast of the cook. "What are we having today?" one snickers. "A delightful stew of despair blended with yesterday's hope." Another chimes in. "Don't forget the sunshine. Oh wait, there hasn't been sunlight in here since before I was born." Howling laughter erupts, echoing off the stone walls, ricocheting through a grim atmosphere like a particularly bad melody. As you navigate the brutal culinary landscape one morsel at a time, a thought creeps in, how the peasant diet reflects quite the paradox. A bit of poor sod sitting across from you suddenly yells, "At least it's not the blasted soup." You shoot him a questioning glance as he explains that it's the highly experimental concoction made of whatever is left in the pot at the end of the day, giving every inmate an impromptu naming ritual worthy of the agony they'd endured. Now don't let the rat-infested atmosphere fool you. The chatter carries a sense of camaraderie you didn't think possible. It's a shared experience, after all, to rise and gratefully appreciate mouldy bread and the luxurious taste of stale despair. But all things considered, let's reflect on this kind of tantalizing breakfast serenade. This breakfast routine, unfathomably grim as it seems, is anchored in the culture of the time, a potent metaphor for life itself. Isn't it marvellous how the human spirit can cling on to laughter and the absurd even when the situation revolves around a steaming pile of bad decisions and questionable cooking tactics? It's a reminder that even in the depths of a medieval dungeon, where freedom flickers like a dying candle, there remains a certain poetic absurdity in sharing the most dreadful of breakfast with those equally trapped in the quagmire of life. So, as you finish your mouldy fare and prepare to venture back into the wretched cycle of dungeon life, remember, breakfast may have been grim, but at least you survived round one. Today's sweet taste of life comes from simply being alive amidst the chaos. And who knows, if you're particularly lucky, maybe the next meal will come with a dose of faint hope, or at the very least a slightly less mouldy piece of bread. Now that you've eaten, or rather tried to eat, it's time to think about wardrobe choices. But surprise, you've been handed a tunic that looks as if it has survived a pestilent avalanche. The fabric is scratchy, heavy, and possibly home to an entire ecosystem of lice. Who needs a fashion statement when you've got a fashion tragedy? And let's not forget the colour. It's an alarming shade of mouldy hay that blends perfectly with the dungeon's dim lighting, making you one with the shadows. It's as if the fabric itself is whispering, "Please don't wear me." As you reluctantly don this marvellous garment, you might find yourself wondering how many other prisoners have worn it before you. Were they also still alive when they passed it on? Was there an initiation ceremony, perhaps? Did it involve a secret handshake with a rat? Just when you think you've outdone yourself, you remember there's no mirror to verify if you look anything short of bedraggled. Instead, you settle for running your hand down the side of the tunic. Oh, that's an unidentifiable stain. Is it blood? Soup? A mixture you'd rather not contemplate. You shift your weight, rightfully concerned about the unpredictable itch that's going to take residence right at this very moment. The scratchy wool is an insufferable wristband made of despair. Fleas leap joyfully onto your skin, holding a party to celebrate their newfound home, while you unsuccessfully try to stifle the urge to scratch at them like a crazed monk in a haystack. Every wiggle of your shoulder or twitch of your chin is accompanied by the familiar chorus of tiny critters collectively mocking your plight. They've opened a pest control business, and you're their poster child. And have we spoken about the underwear situation? If you're lucky, maybe you've inherited someone's linen undergarments that were last washed. Oh, let's say during the last ice age. Congratulations, you're now wearing what could arguably be the medieval equivalent of sandpaper crafted for rub-downs. Only a true warrior could have endured this fabric over the years. Comfort, they say, is a state of mind, and your mind is currently in a state of denial. Now let's take a moment to appreciate medieval shoes. If, by some fortunate happenstance, you've received a pair, pat yourself on the back. They're probably made from leather that was as stiff as your current hope for rescue. Easier to wear than it is to walk in, they feel more like glorified torturing devices than footwear. You teeter on the edge of slipping into foot-related disaster as you shuffle around your cell. This ankle-biting ensemble serves as a constant reminder. Fashion is just another layer of suffering. And so, You ponder your place in this fashionable dungeon society. Is there a hierarchy based on who has the most holes in their tunic or the most interesting stains? Who knew you'd error into this haute couture nightmare, where suffering is the only trend? Surely there's a plot twist looming just around the corner when you realise the guards might actually have better wardrobes than you do. Peering through the bars of your cell, your gaze lands on guards in polished armour reminiscent of gallant knights, their ensemble probably boasting the fashion choices of distinguished noblemen. "Hey buddy," you call, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite your rags. Do you have a tunic in a size that doesn't scream, "I'm 1 foot away from the Inquisition"? The guard merely chuckles as he walks past you, the sound echoing like a chorus of judgment. It's then you realise, in the world of medieval fashion, maybe it's just you against the fabric. Every time someone rips a new hole in your clothing, it becomes a badge of honour, a testament to survival, bravery, and maybe dodging some lunch leftovers. You hear a rumour from a fellow prisoner, someone who might be losing it, about a fashion show scheduled in the adjacent dungeon. They say it features the latest trends in rats and mould, while special guest appearances by various stains captivate the audience. Who will win best dressed? They giggle, their laughter breaking through the pervasive gloom. With a resigned sigh, you settle into your new reality, accompanied by the whispers of what's not to come. Ah, medieval dungeons, where the clothing choices are as dismal as the situation, where creaking tunics scratch insecurities like a bad habit, and where you're left to question, is this worse than the last few hours of my life? Such are the whims of the fashion gods in a place where colour is non-existent, and every outfit is just a reminder of the dark humour that life holds even in the heart of despair. So, should medieval fashion become the next big thing? You'll let the mice decide, because these tunics have definitely seen better days, and if you don't move fast, your hopes for fresh garments may vanish like crumbs in the rat-infested dungeons. Nature calls, but in the medieval dungeon, it's not exactly polite. There's no porcelain throne waiting for you. Instead, it's a chance to engage in a game of "How long can I hold it?" followed by a wild rush to the corner where the smell will haunt you for the rest of the day. You can practically hear the rats giggling as you wince your way to the tiniest bit of privacy you can find. Welcome to the medieval bathroom experience, where the convenience of modern plumbing is nothing more than a fantasy, and toilet paper is still a distant dream, assuming that dream is infused with crusty bits of straw, moss, or whatever else they could find in a barn. As you scuttle towards your so-called toilet area, let's take a moment to reflect on historical alternatives to modern conveniences. In fact, you might want to silently thank your ancestors for the elegant magic of indoor facilities, because here, the only devices available are wooden buckets overflowing with yesterday's leftovers, referred to affectionately as the chamber pot. Sounds fancy, doesn't it? But don't be fooled. This lovely little invention not only collects your offerings, but also doubles as a breeding ground for bacteria. Who knew your morning ritual could serve as an unintended science experiment for centuries to come? Upon reaching your designated corner, you'll find yourself faced with a choice. Do you opt for the bucket, or do you brave the even more precarious position of relieving yourself right on the floor? Spoiler alert, both options come with serious drawbacks. The bucket offers little respect or sanitation, while the other choice invites stares from fellow prisoners who seem oddly too interested in your business. Those rats? Oh, they're not just here for moral support. They're taking bets on whether you can keep your balance while engaging in this most desperate of tasks. Now, let's not forget about privacy, or lack thereof. In this communal living situation, having a bathroom break becomes its own social event. Forget mindfulness for a moment. You're juggling the fear of being seen, the dread of a potential rat nibble, and the awkward eye contact with that guy who just can't stop chattering about his mediocre life choices. You could be sharing a heartfelt moment of vulnerability, but instead, you're probably listening to tales woven with way too much detail about his various fungi ailments. Sorry, not sorry. Once you've deftly navigated the perilous path of medieval toiletry, you may think escaping the embarrassment would come next. The harsh reality. Your relief is short-lasting. As you stare into the void of despair, you may recall magical phrases from centuries past. Gare-de-lou, an ancient shout mandated by the unwritten rules of medieval bathroom etiquette. It roughly translates to "watch out below" when you toss your waste out the window, whether you've captured an audience or not. It's like being part of a Renaissance version of a reality show where everyone eagerly awaits your next performance. But if you thought that was the worst part, wait until you hear the cleanliness standards, or lack thereof. You see, personal hygiene was as fashionable as wearing a potato sack at a royal banquet. Water was seen as a dangerous source of ailments, so bathing became more of a daring notion than a practical lifestyle choice. This meant wiping yourself became more of a theoretical science experiment than a practice rooted in, well, basic biological cleanliness. The medieval version of wet wipes. You're looking at dry straw or whatever plant happens to be within arm's reach. Imagine the discomfort, itchiness, rashes, and you name it. Medieval life is basically a 24/7 itch fest where scratching is more Olympic sport than personal grooming. So, with all these lingering scents wafting from your collective situations, the dungeon becomes even more of a social experiment where misery loves company. Your fellow prisoners bond over shared suffering, sparking conversations about who is the best, and by best, we mean least nightmarish, method for dealing with the unfortunate realities of their lives. So while you're experiencing your dungeon toilet saga, remember those moments will sit firmly in your memory bank, thoughts floating like the proverbial dew in the bucket. And as you eventually settle down beneath a roof that has aged more than a cheese, left too long in the sun, take solace in knowing that somewhere, someone is grateful for your suffering at this very moment. Yes, you might not have a masterfully crafted porcelain throne, but at least you have a shared experience that unites you with those around you. The grim reality of surviving the very worst of medieval life. And with that unfortunate yet oddly comforting notion, you can scrape your way triumphantly back to your corner-bound existence, steeling yourself against the reality of this medieval dungeon's ongoing hilarity mixed with horror. Remember, both regret and laughter accompany you on this relentlessly horrible journey. Now, on with your endless battle for survival. Who needs Netflix when you have medieval torture devices to stare at? In this delightful dungeon, your options for entertainment consist of watching your fellow prisoners be interrogated by kindly guards. It's a performance art you didn't sign up for, with all the suspense of a horror movie and none of the budget for CGI. The atmosphere is intense, thick with the raw musk of fear and despair mingling in the air like two old friends reminiscing over a pint of regret. As you settle in, ready to witness the carefully crafted spectacle unfolding before your eyes, you might be surprised by the amount of creativity the guards employ in their interrogations. It's not just a test of loyalty, it's truly an exhibition of dark ingenuity. You lean against the damp stone wall and try to get comfortable, which, let's be honest, is a nearly impossible task when you're perched on a slab of uneven rock. A guard strolls past, slapping a rusted dagger against his palm like a toddler who just discovered the joys of percussion. "Don't worry, mates," he shouts with a grin that seems far too enthusiastic for someone in such a dreary place. "Tonight's show is going to be a real knee-slapper." You can't help but chuckle at the absurdity. Who'd thought they'd be entertained by sadistic humour and creativity going hand in hand? As you squint into the dim light, you spot your fellow prisoner, Bert the Braggart, being led into the interrogation chamber. Apparently he'd presumed that boasting about accidentally murdering the local lord would earn him some street cred. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The guards appear to savour every moment of his humiliation as they strap him onto a medieval giggler, a device that looks like a dental chair crossed with a giant spider's trap. The idea is simple: torture through laughter, but let's be real, it's just as frightening as it sounds. The first guard steps up, pulling a lever that puts Bert on display like a carnival dunk tank contestant. Now Bert, let's see if we can pull a few giggles from you before we get to the real fun. In medieval fashion, they've devised an array of methods for drawing both groans and howls of laughter from the poor souls strapped in. They begin with the tickling of feet, a method so ludicrously trivial on paper, yet diabolically effective in execution. Bert wiggles and squawks, pleading for mercy while the guards double over in laughter. Who knew torture could have such comic timing? Next up is the infamous Iron Maiden, a hollow iron cabinet filled with spikes, resembling the world's worst wardrobe malfunction. And guess what? Bert's about to learn just how unfortunate fashion choices can be. The guards shove him inside, and you can practically hear the collective gasp from the other prisoners. A delightful chorus worthy of a standing ovation. The Iron Maiden's real magic lies in its quasi-ambiguous nature. It's not just a torture device, it's also a perplexing riddle. You could lose your life, or you could leave with a compelling story, or at least an addition to the embellished tales people will share once they've sealed their fates. As he emerges, a jig of spikes lightly grazes him, creating an ironic plot twist. Less damage, more psychological warfare. Bert steps back, trembling but relieved to be alive. Now he's joking about it. A truly commendable medieval spirit, but let's face it, no one forgets the day they met the Iron Maiden, or the cringe-worthy tales they shared afterward. Suddenly the mood shifts with the arrival of a particularly nasty contraption, the rack. Designed to stretch and break limbs like artisanal bread, the rack can turn a simple segment of your evening into existential dread. Ideal dungeon theatre. You can see the guards wooing each other over who gets to operate it. Throughout the chamber, the sounds of creaking wood, rattling chains and muffled pleas fill the air, mingling in a cacophony reminiscent of a failed concert. This isn't just torture, it's a medieval symphony of suffering, the kind that would gain underground fame had the internet existed. And as Bert starts to realise that not all acclaim is earned, he decides that remaining silent, a somewhat less theatrical yet more pragmatic approach, might be in his best interest. After all, surviving the evening would give him a better shot at escaping the dungeon and telling the tale of how he became the celebrity of his own horror show. So, there you are, cushioned between the tales of the Iron Maiden, the Giggler, and Bert's unforeseen career as a comedic martyr. In the midst of the despair, bizarre humour finds its way into the cracks of your dark reality. Who knew medieval entertainment could be both a lesson in survival and sheer absurdity? As you settle into a deep breath, preparing for whatever fate awaits you, you can't help but ponder the madness of it all, where torture is just another evening's fare in the delightful madness that is a dungeon. Ever met a dungeon guard? They're the real-life versions of that grumpy cat meme, minus the internet fame. You might think they'd be more cheerful considering their job security, but instead, they treat every prisoner like an inconvenience. You'd think they would remember to wash their armour from time to time, but clearly that's not in the medieval manual for dungeons. Instead, they clank around in rusted metal like overcooked sausages, adding a lovely echo of doom to every step they take. In fact, the sound of a dungeon guard approaching is akin to the world's least charming call to prayer. It's the only moment your heart races faster than the sound of your own regrettable choices. As the grumpiest of grumpy cats scans the room, their expression is one of skepticism and disdain, a look perfected over centuries of staring blankly at the suffering of others. You look cozy, they might quip while gesturing at your soiled haybed, comfortably nestled between your cellmate who's convinced the rats are planning an uprising and someone else muttering about their lost socks. Why this guard even bothers with greetings, or more importantly sarcasm, is a true mystery. One would assume they were trained in the ancient arts of pessimism, entrusted to frown so hard that even the dungeons tremble at their presence. If you ever wondered what motivates a medieval guard, it clearly isn't a love for justice or the hope of seeing chivalry redeem itself. No. It's an almost morbid glee in the power dynamics of misery. Picture it. They wield keys that not only lock you in, but provide them with the influence of a petty deity. They'd probably trade their keys for a pocketful of stale bread just for the thrill. You'd swear they might throw an impromptu rave at the clanking sounds of their own exploits, celebrating how many prisoners they managed to frighten just by appealing to their own grumpy nature. And so you can't help but ponder if there's an official what to shout at the prisoner's handbook that these guards reference when they're feeling especially sullen. Remember, they grin through gritted teeth as their fellow guard rolls their eyes. Treat every plea of mercy like an obnoxious knock at your door while you're in deep reflection over your life choices. Sure, you think to yourself, maybe a polite response would be nice. If you weren't in a dungeon, you'd suggest they try emulating an optimistic bard for once, someone who doesn't resemble the embodiment of a storm cloud. Speaking of bard life, the dungeon feels like a dark parody of the taverns outside, where hearty laughter and mugs of ale are a far-off dream. Because the grim humour of your grumpy guard is only a flickering candle against the consuming darkness. Each sneer serves as an unofficial reminder that joy is reserved for those standing atop a castle, while the rest of humanity must sit and stew in the cold, damp and dreadfully foul atmosphere that they've made into an art. It's like the perfect storm of every bad day wrapped into one overflowing chalice of misery. Woe to you if you ever make the mistake of catching their eye at the wrong moment. A single nod could lead to a furious bark about social order, and how the nasty peasants below must endure their just punishments. Great logic, that. Feeling even slightly inspired could lead to full-blown monologues about the good old days, the feudal lords, and the day when guards had a real purpose, like rounding up the rabble rather than standing around grunting. Perhaps they believe they're the last bastion against the tide of misery, and that envy isn't the proper response to their existence, but merely a childish response to authority gone awry. Better yet, what if we treated our grumpy guards like they deserve, by engaging in absurd role-play? "Ah, esteemed guard," you'd call out. "What fine armour you have there. Is that blood from another prisoner or simply a poor choice of soup for lunch?" At that, you can picture the confused look on their faces, as if you just suggested they sing a duet with a rat. A look that just might provoke a smile, or perhaps the first sign of human emotion since they made the choice to don such miserable armour. You know you've hit on something then when you see a glimmer of frustration in their eyes, because deep down, as grumpy as they are, maybe they secretly yearn to escape the mundane rat-infested grind and find a better life than this incessant caretaking role in the world of misfortune. After all, if you can't share laughs even behind these grim stone walls, we might just let the grumpiness win. And trust me, no one wants the grumpy guard melodrama overshadowing what remains of the tiny joys we can still muster while awaiting the next chapter of our endless adventure. Forget soothing nature sounds. Here, you're serenaded by the spine-chilling cacophony of despair. Imagine a blend of sobs, clanking chains, and the occasional manic laughter from the corner where a fellow inmate appears to have lost their mind. Or maybe they found it. Who knows? It's the new age of muzzled anxiety that'll keep you awake. As night descends upon the dungeon like a thick fog, the comforting blanket of silence you once craved is now transformed into an endless symphony of fear laced with lunacy. You lie awake, straining to decipher the distinct voices of your fellow prisoners. There's moaning Martha in cell B3, the original drama queen whose lamenting is scratchy and exaggerated enough to consider casting her in a medieval performance of Cry Me a River. Every night she serenades you, warbling on about how her home was once a cosy little cottage filled with sunshine, before she was whisked away to this delightful pit of despair. Meanwhile, there's sobbing Simon down the hall, who has a knack for turning minor mishaps into catastrophic sob fests. If he spills some water, you might as well pour one out for the reputation of the dungeon staff. Sure, you could attempt to sympathise, but who has the emotional bandwidth in this cesspool of chaos? The chain rattle begins to feel like an involuntary metronome, marking the seconds you lost to this subterranean limbo. Each clank resonates like the ticking clock of doom, reminding you of how good it feels to participate in a one-horse race to madness. Your surroundings are not merely walls, but spectral spectres whispering regrets that tilt and turn like those you'd find in a poorly written ghost story. The echoes of erratic screams from a nearby cell act as a reminder that sanity is a considerable currency in a place where no one is exactly rich. Laughter, manic and creaky, emanates from the depths of the dungeon, frankly making you question the bounds of social decorum in this hellhole. You can't help but tilt your head toward the sound, trying to decipher whether it's the crack of a joke gone horribly awry, or just another inmate driven mad by the mundane horrors of dungeon life. Your initial instinct is to roll your eyes and ignore it, yet there's an irresistible curiosity that keeps you tuned in. Honestly, how is it possible that someone can laugh when the rest of you are drowning in despair? And then there's the Guard of Gloom, whose heavy boots echo along the stone corridors like thunder. They trudge through the darkness as if performing a ritual of sorrow, pausing with casual cruelty to mock the prisoners in their sentences. Keep it down, or I'll add you to the stew pot, they bellow menacingly. You wonder, with a hint of dry humour, how one might end up as a main dish in this unfortunate kitchen. The whole experience seems both laughable and terrifying, all rolled into an emotional burrito of distress. The haunting sounds not only enter your ears, they crawl under your skin, burrowing into your very essence. You might find your heart pounding, coupled with a sense of solidarity that blooms amidst turmoil, the shared struggle of surviving the psychological warfare. You can't help but form a tight-knit family of despair among the inmates, despite the rancid smell of human filth lingering heavily in the air. Laughter and cries slowly fuse into an oddly comforting orchestra of suffering that hums along to the rhythm of prison life. As days blur into nights, you begin to understand the unique bond formed through shared suffering. The sounds of despair connect you to fellow inmates. It becomes a language richer than spoken words. When Martha cracks another endless tale of her lost cottage, your snickers blend harmoniously with the crap she calls a narrative. Each laugh and cry unites you further, like a medieval band of misfits harmonizing their woes for the entertainment of the gods, or perhaps just the rats roaming freely among you. In the end, these cacophonous sounds of despair lie not just as reminders of pain, but rather as anchors tethering your fragile sanity. Here you are, wedged between laughter and lamentation, surrounded by a community adrift in the dungeons of various pasts, forever seeking an escape that may never come. The blend of sobs and laughter serves as your guiding tune, echoing through the stone walls long after you've settled into the clutches of despair. Welcome to the medieval dungeon serenade, a twisted tribute to camaraderie and chaos, a symphony composed of what humanity can endure in the darkest of corners. Wondering where that lovely breakfast came from? The kitchen is more of a cruel lab experiment gone wrong. Watching the daily ration of gruel being prepared is a horror movie in motion. If you think it looks like a failed science project, you're not far off. Is that rat scuttling by cooking ingredients? Or is it the secret ingredient? You're not sure. Welcome to the culinary underworld that defines dungeon dining, where every meal is an unappetizing gamble, and you have all the incentive to lose. Imagine a cauldron bubbling with a concoction that looks suspiciously similar to dirty dishwater. The air is thick with an aroma reminiscent of week-old socks, and you can't quite recall if that was a carrot or just a particularly brave beetle bobbing on the surface. As you approach, the flickering candle casts eerie shadows, illuminating what might be the remains of last week's unidentifiable meat, a rather questionable cut that bears a striking resemblance to your high school principal's face. The cook, a burly figure with a moustache that seems to have its own ecosystem, stirs the pot with the determination of someone who has long given up on their dreams and now exceptionally embraces the art of disappointment in the kitchen. Don't worry. As long as it's warm and doesn't actively move, you can call it dinner, they shout, clearly pleased with their own comedic take on misery. You almost feel comforted until you catch a flicker of motion. A rat, brazen and bold, darts into the pot, drawing a gasp from the hapless guards nearby. Dinner's decided, someone shouts with a whimsical cheer that echoes down the dank stone corridor. And here's the kicker. You're not getting a plate. Oh no, you must pay homage to tradition by eating straight from the pot. It's all very communal, until you remember how many others have licked their fingers and rested them in this grim culinary world. So, you dive in with a spoon, let's hope it's yours, trying not to think about what has come before, while praying that all those touching tales you were told about the terrible fate of prisoners who didn't eat their gruel become the stuff of legend. As you slurp your questionable gruel, thoughts race through your mind. Is that a floating piece of fungus or an accidental pea? Should you try to fish it out or let it go with the best of intentions? This isn't just a meal. It's an audition for survival. Will your body withstand the onslaught of whatever concoction they serve? Each mouthful has the subtlety of a cement block, but as the legends say, what doesn't kill you can give you a very serious infection. This daily rationing isn't just for sustenance. It's a striking reminder of your current status in the grand tapestry known as medieval society. While lords feast on roast peacock and goblets of wine, you're left with a watery substance that accompanies an empty pit of despair in the bottom of your stomach. They say adversity builds character, but you're left wondering if you are simply meant to become another grim tale shared among fellow inmates. Meanwhile, the sounds of slurping fill the dungeon atmosphere, enhanced by the occasional cough as someone chokes on the remnants of poorly cooked oats. You'd think the supportive clattering of spoons against bowls would create a sense of camaraderie, but in reality, it's just a chorus of suffering. And then, the unthinkable happens. Someone sneezes within close proximity of the gruel pot. Words like, "No one asked you," echo through the ranks, and before long debates erupt over whether this was an aggressive plot to poison everyone. After enduring a meal that isn't exactly a feast but more a grim testament to your vitality, you take a moment to reflect. If you are surviving on this culinary sludge, how can the rest of life in the dungeon be so unbearable? Perhaps, just perhaps, the true horror is that you've become desensitized to it all. The tiny genial rat you saw earlier now seems more like a friendly mascot than a villain, and the cook had a bit of charm after all. Maybe there's hope. Either that or a famously dramatic finish to your culinary struggle awaits. reminiscent of ancient Greek tragedy, retold over pints of the strongest mead left unturned. And as your heart races with indecision, and your stomach betrays you yet again, you can't help but chuckle. This kitchen horror show may be your daily bread, but who's really counting calories when survival's just a spoonful away? So here's to gruel, the fine dining of dungeons, the silent partner in the game of life where every meal might just be your last. Bon appetit. Ever heard of the medieval version of pest control? In a dungeon, it's more of a roommate situation with rats. They scurry to the distant corners, chittering about their day while you silently question your life choices. These little scavengers have no fear, and somehow it's a reminder that there's always something worse than your own situation. If you thought sharing your cell with a fellow prisoner was a tragedy, just wait until you see inside the minds of your furry companions. The only thing inspiring more dread than the looming possibility of execution is realizing your roomies have better hygiene than you. Imagine waking up and finding a rat comfortably perched on your foot, contemplating whether it's hungry for breakfast, or simply judging your footwear choices. These aren't your average rats. Oh no. Medieval dungeon rats have dreams of grandeur, roaming the tunnels with confidence only rivaled by the guards. They're like the neighbourhood bullies, but furrier, with an inclination for serious mischief. But let's not be unfair. These little critters serve a higher purpose in the dungeon ecosystem, which, if we're being generous, could also be considered an accidental form of budgeting. In a world where food is scarce and hygiene non-existent, the rats are nature's clean-up crew. They don't discriminate between the slop from the kitchen or the remnants of your last hearty meal and, well, let's just say it isn't a Michelin star experience. Feeling peckish? Consider what your roommates are nibbling on. Oh, look, Benny just found their dinner of hardtack. Guess it's a 2-for-1 special tonight. And doesn't that feel infinitely more appetizing than your own gruel? You can't help but feel a mixture of horror and admiration for their resourcefulness. It's like being stuck in a reality show where the vermin are vying for the culinary spotlight and you're just a spectator. In a twisted way, you start rooting for them. Go on, little guy, make that cheese disappear. I'll just hold these feelings of inadequacy for later. All of this plays out amidst the backdrop of dismal sounds and smells that haunt every inch of your confinement. The banter of the rodents blends seamlessly into the soundtrack of your sadness, a melancholic symphony of squeaks, rustles, and the occasional clatter as they forage for things you've long forgotten, like hope. At least while they squeak, you're reminded you're not completely alone in this vast expanse of despair. These furry roommates are living life to its fullest, even if their fashion sense leaves much to be desired. There's an unspoken camaraderie that develops. You start naming them based on their personalities. Cheesy Jerry, the adventurous rat who braves the corners to steal leftover scraps. Squeaky Steve, the one who seems too fond of your old tunic. And while you're at it, why not give them roles? Jerry would be the brave knight of crumbs, whereas Steve takes the role of the disgraced bard, singing the ballads of lost meals from long ago. As the days blend together in a repetitive cycle of misery, your furry companions unlock layers of creativity you never knew existed. What once seemed like a cursed existence transforms into a comedic drama starring you and the rat ensemble. You find yourself concocting elaborate theories as to what they're really saying to one another. Surely they're planning a coup. We'll be out of here in no time, and when one brazen rat makes off with a piece of your fleece, it's practically a heroic heist to regale your fellow prisoners with. If only I could lead an escape as deftly as that little rascal. As their presence compels you to adapt, you notice that, strangely enough, these moments of humour shine through the dark recesses of dungeon life. The ability to laugh at your grotesque reality is a survival tactic, and these mischievous critters are unwitting co-stars in your personal sitcom. Somehow, sharing this prison of despair offers the bizarre comfort of knowing that amidst the filth and despair, life finds a way, albeit in the form of judgmental rodents with hoarding tendencies. So here's a toast to the rats in your dungeoned life, the overachievers of the survival game. They may not be entirely welcome, but they sure make the waiting game a little more entertaining. Every inch of their scurrying madness somehow distracts from your own situation, and as you ponder your existence, chewing on thoughts more stale than your bread, you realize that even in the gloomiest corners of history, laughter can be your tiniest victory. Perhaps you've dreamt of escape? Think again. The logistics are terrifying and complicated. There's a guard on every corner that seems to have a personal vendetta against your freedom. The dark corridors were supposed to hold the promise of adventure, but now they just lead to disappointment, or worse, more dungeons. You might envision a daring dash under the cover of darkness, plotting your escape with the meticulous prowess of a fox, but the sheer thought of it turns more into an absurd comedy than a heroic pursuit. Let's talk about the plan. You gather a few fellow inmates like some kind of medieval version of the A-Team, minus the actual skills or charisma. Your crew consists of a guy who thinks he's a knight because he once watched a play about King Arthur, a baker who seems to be more committed to bread making than survival, and a very enthusiastic janitor who might actually be trying to escape his own mop. Your excitement is palpable, but not particularly well thought out. First ideas include using a spoon to dig your way out. Spoiler alert, you're not getting far with that. As you huddle together in what you like to call your planning session, you start to gauge the fire in your comrades. The night wannabe suggests dressing up in stolen guard armour. A brilliant idea if only you knew how to find an unguarded stash of armour without being seen. Who knew finding a suit of armour would be akin to searching for a unicorn? Meanwhile, the baker tries to strike a deal involving pastries, claiming sugar will distract the guards long enough for an exit. All you can think is, where exactly is the sugar coming from? Prison isn't exactly a cornucopia of baked goods. You realise that your plan could be gravely misguided. You might think you can sneak past the guards by pretending to be part of a very poorly coordinated musical number complete with jazz hands while humming show tunes. But truth be told, the only song that's going to resonate down that dark corridor is the one sung by the rats enjoying the last crumbs of mouldy bread. Your plan, like a sad balloon animal, starts to deflate. And what about the guards? Let's not forget them. They're the best part of your escape. They're drowsy, moody, and entirely uninterested in your fairy tale dreams of freedom. Instead, they seem much more engaged in the intriguing art of counting their inventory of rusty weapons while sipping on surprisingly terrible ale. There's something about a guard voraciously consuming stale bread and mumbling to himself that just doesn't spell heroic chase to you. But maybe you'll reflect on that during your exit, should you ever make it that far. As you tiptoe out strategically through the shadows, you're struck by the anticipation of fresh air finally filling your lungs. Or at least that's what you thought. You didn't account for the fact that the air inside your cell was more stale than the bread you'd been fed. Instead of the exhilarating tang of freedom, you get a lovely backdraft of whetstone and just-escaped vegetation. Your romantic notion of escaping into the moonlight clashes harshly with the reality of that one neighbourhood dog howling hysterically because it just spotted you. Now you're caught in the tension of wanting the thrill of freedom and simultaneously remembering that you left your actual life choices back in the dungeon. Do you really want to risk a dismal fate just to be free? Is it worth the threats of being chased down by hungry guards intent on preparing you for dinner? You start to doubt. It's like those moments before a failed first date. Panic mixes in with regret. Ultimately, you find yourself collapsing in giggles, realizing that breaking free isn't about the thrill. It's more like leading a group of bumbling fools into the abyss of chaos. The moment of potential freedom fades into a moment of collective insanity that leaves you all staring down a hallway, trying to figure out which way to go. The passionate dreams of escape have swirling shadows that seem far less romantic than you thought. Instead, you turn back, retreating to the comfort of your dungeon that at least feels predictably miserable. As you blend back in with the sweet smell of despair, you conclude that being in a dungeon might be drab and sad, but it's also quite oddly comforting after grappling with the apparent grandeur of a failed escape. At least here you know you won't trip over your own ambitions. Freedom seems overrated anyway. After all, it can't be worse than a mouldy sleepover in a filthy cell with a side of despair, right? What's a prisoner to do with all this time on their hands? You might think crafting from the scant resources around is an option, but let's be real. Trying to create art from the muck of the dungeon is like attempting to paint a masterpiece with mud. Just don't expect the guards to be impressed with your dung art. With no access to paintbrushes or canvases, any attempts at creativity usually result in a glorious mess that rivals the dungeon itself. You might find yourself sitting in the darkest corner of your cell, a pile of straw at your feet, pondering if you can turn it into something remotely meaningful, or at least distractingly absurd. Instead, you cleverly gather remnants of your previous meals, crusty bread, bits of dried meat, and maybe the occasional bones. Combined, they don't make for a gourmet dish, but they do offer endless possibilities for whimsical sculptures. Who needs to connect with your inner Michelangelo when you can make a stunning recreation of a chicken with the remains of yesterday's soup? It's not like anyone is passing through to critique your lifeless poultry creation. I mean, who would dare enter these hallowed halls of despair? Still, there's a certain satisfaction in watching your fellow inmates nod appreciatively at your work of art. After all, who could resist a good laugh at the artistic talents that arise from sheer desperation? Of course, crafting is not limited to food remnants. You soon discover that the fabric of your tattered tunic could be transformed into something buffoonery worthy. After all, there's nothing like a bit of improvised fashion to brighten your day. You start sewing together leftover scraps into a tunic that barely covers your knees, but looks suspiciously like a medieval superhero cape, ready to fight crime, whatever that may be within the confines of these stone walls. Picture you, the dungeoneer, clad in a ragtag outfit, swooping around the prison cells, championing the cause of artistic expression and against the despair of unjust incarceration. Feeling particularly crafty, grab what little self-esteem you have left and try your hand at an absurd puppet show. Using your fingers and any bits of grass or dirt as the star cast, you stage comeback performances for your fellow prisoners. You're those weaker than a cat on a windy day puppets depict the drama of medieval hierarchy, all while you wear nothing but a burgeoning smile and sheer determination. Let's not kid ourselves. It's not Shakespeare, but the laughs accompanied by their shared misery might just keep your spirits afloat. You can only wish for a raucous round of applause, but hey, even a half-hearted cheer can feel like a round of standing ovation when living in a place where hope runs low. But as every artist knows, inspiration can sometimes strike in the oddest of places. You find yourself staring at the wall. That is more of a slowly dripping mass of mould than a solid structure. Did you create a visual masterpiece by observing nature's fungi at work? Ignoring the sound of your own sanity crumbling, you begin documenting your findings in a nature journal of sorts. If you squint hard enough, those blotches almost form patterns reminiscent of a long-lost impressionist painting. Who knew mould could evoke such raw emotion? Of course, it becomes an existential meditative practice translated into the art of suffering. There's a certain camaraderie building among your fellow prisoners as you develop and share your crafting technique. The enthusiasm for turning dirt into accidental masterpieces gives you all a sense of purpose amid the mundanity of every day laden with hopelessness. You swap tips on the best clump of muck to use for a natural pigment, or how best to mould a twig into a flute. That only sounds like tortured cats when played. You start to bond with those gloomy characters behind the stones, forever captured by the absurdity of your situation. But alas, every artist eventually hits a wall, a metaphorical one, that is, and in a medieval dungeon, that metaphorical wall smells similar to last week's unsolved potato dish gone wrong. At some point you find you've spent all your creativity on crafting endeavours, and not an ounce left for a glimmer of hope. You start to wonder if perhaps the best art shouldn't be created at all, especially when the product won't impress anyone besides maybe the rats. These ruminations of inspiration fester in your mind as you give in to the mundane cycle of time spent away from freedom. Crafting in dark spaces may be comical, but that's how survival works, right? You've embraced the imaginative chaos of existence and survived this far amid the filth and despair. Who knows? Perhaps someday you'll share your perverse creations with the world, and the title, Pioneer of Dungeon Art, will proudly precede your name in the annals of creative history, at least in the exquisite twisted timeline of artistry born from despair. And as the day drags on, it becomes clear that while your crafting with filth provides a temporary break from the harsh realities of dungeon life, it's ultimately a humorous smudge on the monotony downright necessary to survive this grim chapter of existence. And isn't that just the art of living? Ever tried to catch a quick nap in a dungeon? It's less rejuvenating and more a dance with nightmares. The distant echoes of grunts and moans make pillow fights feel like gentle breezes, and when you do slip into a restless slumber, you're promptly jolted awake from a dream involving dinner rolls. Yes, that's right. In your sleep-deprived delirium, dinner rolls have become the high point of your existence, a feast fit for kings, a fairy tale rendering of the most luxurious bread. How did you come to this? A dungeon, where dreams go to die and the only guarantee is waking up to a goopy reality. As you attempt to settle into the hard, cold floor, the stone beneath you reminds you of one thing. Comfort is an overhyped luxury. You roll to one side, trying to ignore the dampness seeping in through your tunic. Is that water, sweat, or perhaps a small puddle of yesterday's regrets? Whatever the source, you'd rather not know. You huddle deeper into your available shreds of fabric, conjuring memories of cozy blankets warmed by an actual fire, instead of the meagre glimmer of the hope that rarely flickers here. The chorus of despair rises around you, a gruesome symphony created by your fellow prisoners, the quiet sobs of a newly imprisoned lad, the complaints of an old-timer who now resembles a walking skeleton, and the occasional raspy cough from someone who definitely won't see the sunrise. Consider it nature's version of an open mic night, only the audience didn't buy tickets, and it's all on the top hits of misery playlist. In that moment of supposed peace, your mind races. What if you all live through this together? What if you're forged by hardship, moulded into some kind of medieval superhero made of stale bread and desperation? But then the metallic clink of chains snaps your burgeoning determination. Someone is being led away for processing the euphemism for whatever horrific fate awaits them. Your thoughts spiral further down the rabbit hole. You might wake up in a dungeon again tomorrow, or worse. So much for dreams of grandeur. This is the grim reality of medieval life, where survival could mean being the last one standing, because you've resisted the lure of despair longer than your fellow prisoners. But there's humour buried within this bleakness. You've discovered a sense of survival guilt that even the most hearty of knights would struggle to explain. You're merely existing amidst a group of people who have all been dealt a rough hand, but here you are, still breathing, still craving dinner rolls. The irony strikes like a joke that was too soon. You could actually start writing a menu for the grim prison cafeteria. Today's special: soup that smells suspiciously like someone's bedroom socks and a side of croutons made from last week's stale bread. You laugh, only to be shushed by someone in the corner. You forget if it's the sad-faced woman or the mystically joyous old man with a song in his heart but cracks on his skin. Just as you think laughter is the best medicine, the skin-crawling realization hits again. You might actually die in this dungeon without ever trying the most decadent cake. Thanks to that horrifying confinement, your menu consists solely of self-pity. You bite your lip to keep from laughing. 'Tis the noble pursuit of survival, naught but a delicate dance between desire and despair, only you're still out of step. You stumble through reminiscing about your own kitchen adventures back at home, showcasing your prowess that impressed even the pickiest eaters. Now, here you are, reminiscing about your mother's outrageous cooking, which could put a roasted rat to shame. As you return to your makeshift bed of stone, the thought arises: what could make this dungeon more bearable? Control your circumstances. If only you could create a dinner party scenario, a collective night of camaraderie where all prisoners swap absurd culinary tales about what they dream they could cook if freed. Surely a banquet featuring everyone's wildest cooking fantasies would put a smile on the grisly guards' faces, or at least dull the edge of their daggers. The vision hangs in the air like a candle in a ghastly room, a palimpsest of hope amidst dismay. But even your dreams must end. The roar of the guards makes relief seem like a distant novelty. Every clank of armour rustling as they pass is a reality check. Your time as a prisoner continues, and the only escape is through your imaginings, where every crash of the door sounds like the clattering of pots in a crowded kitchen, and not the slicing of futures. So you close your eyes once more, reminding yourself that it will somehow be all worth it. Not just for inexplicably cherished dinner rolls, but for a future that exists beyond these stone walls, however elusive that might be. Step into the mind of a dungeon inmate where ancient etiquette rules apply. Do you greet your neighbour? It may or may not involve sharing rations. Is spitting on a guard appropriate? You'd think it is, but you'd be wrong. Understanding the nuances of social hierarchies becomes your new full-time job. In this dank, dimly lit abyss, common courtesies twist into absurd battles for survival. You could count on yourself to learn the rules of engagement faster than a rat scurrying for leftover gruel. Let's start with the basics. Eye contact. Making eye contact should come easily, but in a medieval dungeon, it turns into an Olympic sport. Gaze too long at an adjacent prisoner, and you might ignite a passionate debate over ownership of a still untouched breadcrumb. A casual hello suddenly evolves into an intense negotiation over who may or may not have personal rights to that crumb. You better believe the debate will end with someone sobbing and vowing loyalty to the crust. Now, about sharing rations. When it comes to handing over those pitiful scraps of food, don't expect gratitude. Sharing means your neighbour could end up thinking the crusty piece of bread you reluctantly offer them holds the key to eternal life, a mistake you won't soon forget. Why? Because once it's out of your hand, you become the villain in their story of culinary survival. The honesty of a simple act can quickly devolve into bitter rivalry over who deserves the mushy stew at the bottom of the pot. Trust me, it's a slippery slope with no safe landing. And let's address the elephants in the room: foot odour and a distinct lack of hygiene. Here, personal space is as non-existent as your hopes of ever reaching the surface world again. You and your neighbour's feet are practically cuddling, leading to some decidedly awkward moments. Forget about politely tapping your neighbour's shoulder to get their attention. kneeing their foot is far more efficient and, more importantly, less offensive. Oops, you'll say with a grin while they wince in disgust and plot their revenge in the form of an unkempt toenail aimed at your sandal. While you first think of the simple act of stretching your legs a little, be cautious. In a dungeon, that's the equivalent of a battle cry. The moment your foot brushes against a fellow inmate's leg, the unspoken language of cozy resentment ignites. It's either a declaration of war, or you're about to be swapped into their dinner plans for the next feast. In your head, you'll start crafting elaborate bonds of friendship built on mutual disdain for the guards. After all, misery loves company. Speaking of the guards, let's dive into that precarious terrain. Spitting on them? Not advisable. In fact, doing so might earn you stints in solitary confinement, taking the big chill to a whole new level of discomfort. Instead, consider perfecting your art of passive aggressiveness. You can passionately mutter complaints under your breath about their unfortunate life choices without actually committing the sin of rebellion. It's a subtle skill, but one greatly rewarded by shifting societal norms of dungeon life. Whispers of gossip among the inmates are another highly valued currency. In this subterranean social network, exchanging rumours about when old Greg will confess to plotting against the guard can provide valuable relief from the stone-cold reality. But tread lightly. One misstep in rumour-mongering, and you'll find yourself on the receiving end of the most elaborate and theatrical accusations. Who knew a single mispronounced name could spiral into accusations of treason? Now let's address the restroom dilemmas. Because privacy is an art form that didn't quite make the cut due to space constraints, you'd think a trip to the designated relief area might be a simple affair. Not in this dungeon. You may have to schedule your potty breaks around someone else's misadventures regarding cramping etiquette. It's an intricate dance of dodging stares and muted laughter, and ultimately you'll discover that the nuances of using the bucket are more complicated than medieval warfare tactics. At the end of the day, surviving the etiquette challenges in a medieval dungeon requires sharpening your wits more than your weapons. It's a bizarre social experiment where humour, absurdity, and the never-ending struggle for survival ricochet in glorious chaos. So, when you're finally able to crawl back to your corner and consume the last dregs of your mysterious pottage, just remember, in this world, laughter may be the best escape plan you've got. Welcome to the art of living in filth, where every day is a masterclass in the subtle and absurdly humorous etiquette of dungeon life. Ever heard of an open confession? Well, in a dungeon it means you're spilling your darkest secrets, probably to someone who's going to spill them to a guard. Nice try. But there's a certain hilarity in realizing everyone has a tale just as dreadful as yours. Who knew misery loved company? As you sit in a corner of this stone prison, surrounded by damp walls that absorb your every sigh, the murmurs of despair become a kind of strange therapy session. What's that smell? Oh, just a blend of sweat, fear, and anyone's guess at yesterday's gruel. It's less of a support group and more of a my sadness is bigger than your sadness competition. You lean in closer to your fellow inmates, eavesdropping on their confessions like you're catching up on the latest episode of a ghastly reality show. I once kicked a rat on a dare, one prisoner boasts, puffing out his chest as if he conquered a dragon. Yeah, I accidentally spilled soup on the Lord's shoes, another counters, eliciting gasps of admiration. Remarkably, it's a bit like comparing battle scars, only instead of knighthood prizes, they win each other's pity and something akin to camaraderie. Honestly, you never expected to find yourself engaged in a duel of miserable anecdotes. The details that follow are just as ridiculous as they are tragic. Did I tell you about the time I tried to bribe a guard with crumbs? A woman exclaims while gesturing wildly, almost knocking over a rat that's undoubtedly plotting its next meal adventure. He took the bread and laughed in my face. Your heart sinks for her, but you can't help chuckling at the absurdity of it all. Oh, please. I tried to barter my last crust with someone who needed it for a second chance at life. Turns out they weren't even hoping to escape. They wanted it to feed a stray cat. The fact that there was a cat involved makes it even more tragic, and you can't help but wonder, is there even a stray cat around here? Or is that just another fantasy sketch? Conversations drift from the serious to the outright ludicrous. Half-hearted conspiracies pop up like mushrooms after rain. I'm telling you, everyone thinks the guards are just men in armour, but some of them are actual demons, claims a burly man who seems to have read way too many books during his occasional visits to the dungeon library, or what you like to call the roughly thrown-together pile of regret. He goes on to tell tales of shadowy figures and evil spirits that walk the halls at night. One time, I saw one slip bread under a door. You and a few others nod in agreement, although deep down you all wonder whether someone slipped him extra ale during his last visit. And then, there it is, the inevitable confession that strikes just the right chord for humour in this swamp of despair. I didn't even do anything wrong, just borrowed a chicken. I thought I was going to die for a poultry heist. The room bursts into laughter, which reverberates off the cold stones, making you feel slightly less alone. It's a reminder that before being shackled by chains, your fellow prisoners were, believe it or not, humorous and mischievous souls roaming the world, until one fateful cluck, as it turns out. But still, in this confessional quagmire, a certain anxiety lingers. You can't shake the feeling that sharing your tales may cost you more than a mere chuckle. Look, my situation isn't as amusing, you finally say, tentatively lowering your voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I thought the world could only look, but it feels like it's closing in here. The laughs subside, and for a moment your confessions appear to solidify bonds like glue on half-baked pottery. But what's pottery if not a fragile facade? So you return to your observations of the others, simply laughing together at the absurdity of each other's lives, while grasping for the twisted comedy hiding in your shared fates. Who would have thought that sharing laughter, misery, and the occasional tale of drunken chicken escapades could outline the absurdity of living in a life suspended between walls, cold stone, and a wish for freedom that seems to dangle just out of reach? As someone said, sometimes life is a dungeon filled with rats, but at least we can all take turns telling the tales. Or, as one of the other prisoners says with a dry chuckle, quite the riveting memoirs of madness we've written here. Indeed they have, and even in the dregs of despair you find a semblance of humanity still laughing amid the chaos. From complaints about the dungeon's decor to lamenting over not having any more rats to chew on, exploring the various methods of moping is both an art and a science. After listening to your fellow prisoners' wails, it's clear that you've been underestimating the power of a good mope. It's become part of the culture here, a ritual, if you will. So let's dive into the delightful abyss of despair and witness the various ways inmates showcase their enthusiasm for sadness. First, there's the classic wallowing technique. This involves curling up on the hard, cold stone floor, hugging your knees like they're the last bit of warmth in the universe. With a heavy heart and dramatic flair, you let out a long, drawn-out sigh that echoes strangely in the dank air, attempting to communicate your existential despair with anyone who may or may not be listening. A sigh that deep might just make the rats reconsider their lifestyle choices. Bonus points if you manage to make it sound like a melancholic ballad, as if you're auditioning for a medieval soap opera. Next up, you've got the creative complainer. Those masterful talents turn ordinary gripes into epic narratives. Ah, if only I had a bed that didn't squish the rats against the wall, they lament, gesturing dramatically as if appealing to an invisible crowd. I could sleep like a noble beneath the elaborate velvet covers, Instead, I lie here on this hay where spiders are apparently the decorative feature of choice. Meanwhile, it's hard not to roll your eyes at their flair for dramatics while everyone else is hanging about, desperately trying to keep the mood light, or at least distracted from their own wretchedness. Then there's the mournful moan, a sound inspired by tragic tales passed down 2 generations. If you listen closely, you'll notice each inmate has their own signature wail, a personal touch that can range from a soft whimper to all-out wailing worthy of a tragedy at the Globe Theatre. You hear one poor soul across the chamber lamenting about their lost pie from last week's feast, while another is still reeling from 2 years of terrible cooking. You ask yourself whether they're discussing their regrets or practicing for an avant-garde theatre show. Either way, it's a mesmerising symphony of sorrow that brings a peculiar warmth to the frigid atmosphere. Now, let's not forget the community coffee clatch of despair. Picture it. Clusters of inmates sitting together, swapping sad stories while building a support network of hopelessness. "Oh, you've lost hope in ever escaping? How quaint. I lost hope in life after my 5th crutch broke last winter." Discussions often delve into the merits of self-pity as a coping mechanism, alongside the fact that if pity was a sport, some would definitely take home the gold medal. They may not leave the dungeon, but at least they've perfected the art of not leaving the cosy confines of their own despair. And here comes the showmanship with prison poetry, a fearless attempt to capture the beauty of suffering in verse. Each stanza, whispered through the dark, becomes an ode to disappointment. "Oh, why must cold stone cradle my weary bones? Why must rats be my only companions in a room full of despair?" The way they recite it makes you question if there isn't some hidden, existential truth there. Is it just you, or might they truly be the Shakespeare of stench? And what's that about group sobbing sessions? Yes, you heard right. There's a high chance someone will suggest a let's vent our collective anguish gathering to lift spirits. Each participant shares their most forlorn scenario, the ultimate sad-off if you will, where everyone rates the other's grief as if it was some bizarre contest. "Ah, you're sad about a lost family? Pathetic. My pet rat turned on me." You find yourself chuckling as collective sadness becomes a bonding experience, all while others lie cloaked in shadows, their noise absorbing each other's despair like a black hole of melancholy. Ultimately, though the dark walls may enclose you, the emotions echoing within the dungeon provide a peculiar sense of camaraderie. In this forsaken place where hope is lost, you find something oddly comforting. The knowledge that you're not alone in your misery. You exchange groans, eye rolls, and affectionate sighs with your fellow inmates until you collectively decide that eating their own rations might just be the next extraordinary act of rebellion. It's in the laughter, creativity, and shared sorrow that you begin to feel a flicker of warmth against the bleakness of the dungeon. A reminder that mourning might just be the only joyful activity left in a life constrained by sorrow. The medieval version of running the gauntlet is more reality than myth here. Your daily walk may involve dodging not just guards, but also discussions about sentencing that could turn you into today's unfortunate lunch special, a delightful concoction of regret and misfortune. Picture this. You're shuffling down the corridor, knees knocking like your own personal drum roll of impending doom, and a guard approaches like a very disgruntled psychopomp. He's not just the gatekeeper to your fate. He's also the grumpiest character in a really bad play that nobody wants front row seats for. As you sneak past him, you try to appear inconspicuous while your stomach churns at the thought of what could happen to anyone found wanting. Words like hanging, flogging, and the Iron Maiden bounce around your mind like rabid peasants at a market. You carefully sidle your way past the murky recesses of the dungeon, straight into the realm of philosophical musings. How do you high-five a rat without getting bitten? Is it ethical to trade meals with a neighbour who may have been accused of stealing your last slice of mouldy bread? Impressive quandaries, aren't they? But the real challenge comes in the form of your fellow prisoners, each with the personality and charm of a confiscated potato. How could they possibly think that whispering about potential escape plans while giving their best version of a death stare is going to help? With every huddled group discussing their fate, your paranoid tendencies spiral, and the notion that everyone is conspiring to throw you under the executioner's axe takes root. If they only knew, you think, that I'm just trying to survive the day without introducing my face to the wall of shame, as you inadvertently eavesdrop on plans that sound like they belong in a summer camp gone wrong. "Have you heard?" one shifty character whispers, his eyes darting about like he's trying to catch flies. "They say Sir Hobgoblin is next for the gallows. Makes you realise how lucky we are, eh?" Lucky? In this dungeon where each corner might harbour a death trap cleverly disguised as a rat-infested storage bin. Your newest realisation. The only thing more dangerous than the guards are the twisted stories floating around among your fellow captives. As you trek further along the corridor, you suddenly hear a shout. An instinct takes over. You duck to the side, narrowly dodging a guard's lazy swing as he stumbles into the wall, clearly having skipped breakfast, lest the universe align against him too. Breathing that sigh of relief is short-lived, as you catch sight of what appears to be a very disgruntled chicken clucking its way through the gloom, a harbinger of doom perhaps, or merely a metaphor for your own spiralling existence. It's not just chickens that serve as reminders of your own transitory lifestyle in this hellhole. There's a whole cadre of vermin weaving through your thoughts, each dodging, weaving, and pirouetting through your imagination as if it were a stage of life and death. You see them as representations of your fellow human souls reduced to mere food options. Tensions rise as you glance down at your only real problem. Your belly is beginning to grumble, not giving the slightest hint of the compassion you could have from a crusty loaf or a flavour boost from yesterday's stew. And don't get you started on the whole concept of escape routes. The one path that seems feasible could easily lead you straight into the moat. Who would have thought that getting out of this wretched basement could involve swimming through swamps of filth? You conspicuously eye a couple of pigeons doing their own version of ballet, flapping around without a care in the world. If only you could embody their carefree spirit instead of worrying about dodging swords and scathing comments from guards. And then, just as you contemplate your options, a daring leap through the nearest window or a sociable chat with your fellow inmates to stroke your shared misery, a distant tolling of the bell makes your heart plummet. It signals lunchtime or worse, sentencing. What a joyous affair that would be, to stand up in front of the assembly of your peers, listen to your name called, and indulge in commiseration instead of real food. So you conclude your daily gauntlet of decisions, praying to whatever protective spirits might be listening that your next chance at freedom won't lead you directly to the chopping block or worse, another day's worth of the dungeon grind. The gallows loom, the rat scurries, and survival awaits, a little like winning the lottery but with much lower odds and regrettably little in cash prizes. But for now, you keep moving, weaving between hopelessness and laughter, as you navigate the grotesque obstacle course that is your existence. The dungeon isn't just a physical place, it's a realm of superstition that would put your most creative nightmares to shame. From walls that whisper to ghostly figures wandering the halls, every corner has its own spooky folklore, and they're absolutely convinced these stories will keep them company. Or worse, ensure them a front row seat to their own doom. It's a constant air of paranoia, where the echo of a rat scrabbling across the floor becomes the harbinger of a terrifying phantom. Just last night, an inmate swore they saw the silhouette of Sir Reginald of the Wailing Sigh. Legend has it he met his end in this very dungeon, but all you have to do is miraculously not blink when you hear his name, or else he'll choose you for his haunting tour. Spoiler alert, it's not a 5-star experience. Of course, every ghost story has its share of ridiculous details designed to invoke just the right amount of barnyard horror. For instance, there's the tale of the disappearing scone. Yes, a scone. Sorry, no goblins or ghouls here, just baked goods turned bedlam. Apparently, any poor soul foolish enough to swipe an extra scone from the guard's rations is doomed to wander the dungeon for eternity, searching for pastries that may or may not exist. And let me tell you, nothing warms the heart like imagining your fate tied to a rogue muffin. Would you even bother explaining that to your ancestors? Ah, yes, I perished for the want of a second scone. Then there's the superstition of the hiccuping ghost. It's said that if you hiccup 3 times while telling a tale of sorrow, you'll summon the spirit of the castle's former jester, who will enact a truly tragicomic performance. This is actually a favourite pastime among your fellow inmates, who take turns fizzing their way into a hypnotic frenzy, hoping the spectre will dance them into oblivion. But spoiler alert, his dance moves are just as tragic as your dinner menu. Imagine a spastic marionette in a fog haunted by mouldy bread. That's a show neither of your parents would attend. And if talking about the hiccuping ghost isn't enough to rattle your ribs, let me introduce you to Old Man Fungus. This delightful character is said to reside in the very damp corners of the dungeon, preying on those who dare to complain about the conditions. If you're ever overheard grumbling about the poor etiquette of cuisine, or the blatant lack of personal space, you better believe you'll be visited by a particularly foul odour that wafts straight from the depths of mildew. Was that Old Man Fungus? Or did I just eat the last of my gruel? It's not only the dead that have their own tales. Your living environment is full of silly rules that dictate your daily survival. For example, never, under any circumstances, should you step on the line where the cell door meets the floor. Why? Because it's believed to be a portal to the land of the dishonoured, a realm filled with gnashing teeth and folks who didn't keep their elbows off the table. I can't tell you how many times you faked a stumble just to avoid the threshold, hopping lightly like a calf on a steamy road. And oh, the legends. What about the Forbidden Stone? A smooth, flat rock in one corner of the dungeon is rumoured to have granted a single wish to an actual living prisoner several centuries ago. Of course, the twist is that it never works for anyone else. But surely after approximately 15 more backflips, or maybe just a weak attempt at a yoga pose, you'll be the lucky one. And if that stone's still thinking, you might have the chance at your heart's true desire, a hammock with not a trace of hay. Yet, despite the absurdity of it all, there is a strange camaraderie among the prisoners, united in the belief that these superstitions act as a shield against the daunting reality outside. You glance over at your fellow inmate and exchange a knowing grin, a silent acknowledgement that life is miserable, and shared tales, unsavoury as they may be, are a lot better than silence. After all, it's better to laugh at the absurdity of superstition than to dwell on the unfortunate fate of ending up as a scone-starved ghost. So, you smirk through the gloom and embrace the beauty of silliness. In a place that's forgotten warmth and laughter, superstition becomes your unwelcome comfort, a little ridiculous, a little scary, and altogether human. Would you rather banish your fears or embrace the madness? Only time will tell, and as it turns out, time in the dungeon seems to crawl slower than a snail on a rainy day. But don't worry. There's always a rat to distract you with a fib or two about the disappearing scone while you wait for the next ghost story to slither its way into your ear. Ever wondered if rationing could be funny? In your dungeon, it absolutely can. From bartering scraps with other prisoners to pretending that basically an edible paste is artisan bread, you'll experience hunger pangs and laughter, both at the very same time. Just picture it. A group of bedraggled souls huddled in the corner, hustling over a plate of something you can't quite identify. Perhaps it's supposed to be some form of porridge, but just as likely it's a tiny mountain of regret masquerading as a nutritious meal. As you stare at your meagre portion, the first thought that crosses your mind is whether the chef has a vendetta against appetite. However, your fellow inmates seem to think they've arrived at Michelin star standards. "Have you tried the pottage of despair today?" one inmate exclaims while holding up a bowl of something that looks suspiciously similar to mud. "Extra gritty, just how I like it," they chirp. Getting excited about food in a dungeon is a lot like preparing for a funeral. You have to celebrate the little things before the lights go out for good. It's a strange survival game where you find yourself trading rations like their currency, even though you're left with nothing more than pitiful remains. The excitement of the barter fills the air. "I'll give you my half-eaten rat tail for your last piece of mouldy bread," shouts a particularly enthusiastic character nearby. Somewhere between bedbug bites and anxiety about the next round of torture, prisoners have mastered the high art of gastronomic negotiation. The food, if you can even call it that, is prepared in a way that would make anyone question whether they've accidentally wandered into a medieval horror film or a new genre of experimental art. Add a dash of mould for flavour, and voila, you've got a meal that could double as an impromptu science experiment. Is the rancid flavour a hint of rosemary, or just the ghost of last week's dinner, you ponder? But then, just as despair begins to settle in, someone starts spouting inspirational lines about the glories of dungeon cuisine. If this was gourmet food served up by Michelin chefs, they'd be singing praises to its complexity. Someone chimes in between gnawing on a piece of unidentifiable protein. Cue the laughter. It's laughter and misery brought together like old friends. The sheer absurdity of the culinary situation becomes a daily entertainment routine. You find yourself tossing around joke about the chef de dungeon and his mysterious ingredients, unsure whether the chef has lost their marbles or just their full grasp on what food should really be. "You call that a soup? I call it a personality crisis in a bowl," chortles one watch. Suppose anyone actually suggests a little culinary creativity. The room erupts in a frenzy of novelty. "Let's sprinkle a bit of ash on our slop for a smoky flavour," proposes a bright-eyed inmate who seems enthusiastically delusional. Only in this dank place could such a suggestion earn a round of applause. You nod along, wondering if all this insanity is simply a coping mechanism for your dilapidated psyche. And then there's the day one of the prisoners accidentally discovers that the mysterious grey clump of food has indeed transformed into something exciting. A rat has boldly decided to measure its culinary tastes against yours. "Ah, I never knew that 3-star Michelin cuisine would come at such a price," you sarcastically muse as the scurrying intruder makes its way through the morsels of mould. Somehow this bizarre incident becomes a shared legend among the group. The myth of the gourmet rat takes on a life of its own. While you might be enduring the bleakest moments of your life, it's the humour that keeps your spirits, albeit somewhat deflated, afloat. The laughter that fills this dark dungeon serves as a reminder, however absurd, that humanity can still cling to a spark of joy in the most dismal of circumstances. The day you can laugh over a bit of gruel, demure as it may be, is the day you know that you've carved a bit of resilience into this dark, murky existence. So sit back, raise your bowl of rationed artisanal bread, and savour the moment. Because somehow, amidst the muck, the rats, and the unsettling stench, you found a sliver of reason not just to survive, but to thrive in a comedic parody of culinary despair. And who knows, maybe after all this, you'll leave the dungeon with a new recipe that could scare even the toughest restaurant critic. One that plays on desperation, hilarity, and yes, a sprinkle of rat. Bon appétit. As you while away the hours, discuss your plans for the legendary time-wasting Olympics. Events include catching flies with your tongue, creative complaining, and more competitive options that involve staring contests with rats. Believe it or not, it's more entertaining than it sounds. Honestly, who would have thought that sitting in a dark, dank dungeon could spark such thrilling ideas? As the hours blend together, boredom and creativity collide into a spectacle of absurdity. You look around at your fellow inmates, their faces illuminated by the faint flicker of torches, each considering the best way to contribute to this strange athletic endeavour. Picture this. The grand opening ceremony is really just a couple of you trying to block the sight of the rotten hay towards the back of your cell while adding some fanciful flair to your meagre clothing. Then the crowd goes wild. Okay, wild might be overselling it. When someone trips on a loose stone, giving rise to applause as loud as the rat under your own bedclothes. It's like you've unintentionally staged the worst version of a medieval variety show, and you're all starring in the lead roles. First up, you propose the event, fly jousting. Contestants make tiny lances out of whatever they can find, splintered sticks, crusty old bread, while the audience cheers. It's the only jousting you're likely to survive in here, you declare, and your crowd of fellow prisoners buzzes with excitement. All skills are assessed by the principle of how much of your dignity are you willing to lose. As contestants attempt to poke flies mid-flight, you can't help but wonder if the flies are also judging you. Sometimes you could swear those little creatures have more ambition than you do at this point. The next event is creative complaining. Each contestant must bring forth their woes with an artistic flair. One inmate, let's call him Roger the Regretful, manages to weave a long lament about his tragic fate into an epic poem that earns him considerable brownie points. Next, a heartbroken fellow prisoner offers a 3-minute monologue about how he should be out winning battles instead of being locked in here, filled with tears and fervent passion. The best part? You've got an audience completely captivated, hanging on every melodramatic turn of phrase about the unfairness of life. Classic medieval material, really. Then comes the finale, a duel of staring contests with rats. Armed only with your fear, and hopefully not something more grotesque, you sit cross-legged, facing off against the bravest rat in your cell. The stakes? The winner doesn't have to share their grass and dirt porridge with the loser for a whole day, as rotting bits of cheese provide suspenseful indulgence. Both you and your rat companion lock eyes. The anticipation reaches an all-time high. The rest of the prisoners lean in, nearly falling into your makeshift arena, shouting encouragement. Suddenly a rat sneezes and scurries away. It's a clear disqualification. You're not deterred. As the sun dips behind the craggy stone walls, it could be considered tragic that time is slipping away from you like loose floorboards. But there's a certain camaraderie that has emerged from this unlikely Olympics. You cut through the heaviness of your situation with awkward laughter and bizarre feats that bring a flicker of joy. Well, as much joy as one can muster when living in a stone tomb with questionable hygiene. You begin a new event, desperation sculpting. Utilising the bits of dirt and mould collected from the bottom of their cell, fellow inmates create abstract shapes, trying to pass off piles of sludge as modern art. Behold, you declare, the statue of lamenting woe. Someone loudly critiques that it looks more like last week's supper, but to be fair, you all know that anything beyond resembling the leftover gruel is a major win in this gritty competition. As night falls, you all settle around the central pillar of the space, the shared futility of existence, engaging in the time-wasting Olympics camaraderie. This surprisingly entertaining distraction smooths over the harshness of the day-to-day drudgery in the dungeon. Who knew that within these walls of despair, the human spirit could flourish through the sheer absurdity of imagination? And as you drift into yet another murky sleep, you realise that amidst the muck and loss, it's moments like these that remind you of the resilience of humanity, even in the bleakest times, where a mouse becomes a noble adversary. Laughter eclipses sorrow, and imagination reigns supreme, if only for a while. So, as you prepare for whatever horror tomorrow may bring, cherish tonight's lullabies of camaraderie, laughter, and pitiful competition, even if they all fall terribly short of glorious victory in the medieval banquet of despair you've come to know all too well. Every moan, squeak, and creak becomes a part of your misery mixtape. Welcome to the soundtrack of your doom. It's not just a sound experience, it's a duet with despair, offering a vibe that makes you rethink your life choices while you dance to the beat of chains. Picture it. The drumming of rain on the stone roof acting as a relentless metronome, with a soft tap-tap-tap echoing in the deep recesses of your mind like an angry clock, reminding you that time is very much not on your side. It's a stepping tune that reminds you of how futile your daydreams of escape have become. Every now and then, a fellow inmate might let out a weep that combines despair with a hint of melodrama. It's an Oscar-winning performance each time, as if they believe the darker the cry, the closer they come to freedom. You can practically see them clutching an imaginary microphone, poised for an audience of their fellow prisoners who are all too busy contemplating their own lives, or possibly how to make the best use of that remaining mouldy bread roll you were saving for a snack. The guards contribute their own colourful flair to this symphony of doom. The loud clanking of their boots against the flagstone floors is a percussive beat that sets the tempo for each weary-hearted wail echoing through the gloom. They intimidate with the sound of authority, their shouts blooming despair like weeds in a ruin. On particularly energetic days, you might hear the resounding whack of a baton, a sound that reverberates deep within you, a reminder to behave or risk being thrust into a spot on this miserable mixtapes Hall of Fame. And let's not forget the signature sound of scurrying. Those adorable little scabies-fueled furry fiends, mice and rats, weave through the cracks in the walls, persevering with their own chaotic rhythm of tiny paw taps that have become the background score to your misery. Their incessant chatter and playful tilting of whatever remains of your dignity operate on their own tender timing, a sort of ad-lib show. It's like they're generally unimpressed by your sorrow, squeezing through the darkness with a casual nonchalance that only emphasizes your despair. As you curl up on your makeshift straw bed, your ears finely tuned to this auditory environment, you start to recognize the patterns. The creaking of the wooden door signifies lunch is on the way. If you can interpret the discordant gasps of fellow inmates, you'll also discover that today's stew is likely a little more questionable than usual. Their defensive rat-a-tat sounds, accentuated by gasps, form a collective commentary about whatever dubious item is being served. Was that a potato, or has the cook gone rogue and introduced a few new ingredients to your meal? You start to wonder if you're becoming a little too privy to these sounds, if your eavesdropping has crossed into a borderline obsession. In a place devoid of true communication, the auditory landscape becomes a parallel universe, where feelings are broadcast through pitchy wails and murmurs. There's something oddly comforting in that. Sure, you might be stuck in a dark, cramped dungeon, but you're also wrapped up in a chilling orchestra of human emotion projected from the hearts of your fellow captives. Occasionally there are moments of softness, like the gentle sighs of a weary soul considering its fate. These sounds intertwine with the creaky wooden beams above, beckoning you to life cycle considerations. Past, present, and future. The awareness hits you like a bard in the courtyard, singing that your current existence makes you feel like a ghost in your own life. You've become a spectator to your own fate. This realization colours the ambience with a deeper shade of melancholy. As night falls and shadows lengthen, the soundscape shifts. The moans grow quieter, the clanks more common as the guard's footsteps lessen. You hear the distant echo of dripping water, evolving into a rhythmic pulse that slows your frantic mind, and the cells around you exude a sense of calm, lulled into a haze of inexplicable shared suffering. It's both beautiful and horrifying, an ode to the resilience of the human spirit echoing within deprived stone walls. So, as you lie there, on your straw bed of dreams dashed to pieces, let the chilling sounds cradle you gently. They become a reminder that even in despair there's a peculiar comfort to be found. After all, your suffering playlist with its highs and lows will unfailingly accompany you through each torturous moment of this dungeon dwelling, shaping you into an unbreakable spirit, or perhaps just another lost note wandering through the haunting soundtrack of regret. Behind all the hopelessness lies potential. The great dungeon conspiracy. Every fellow inmate has theories about how the guards are secretly plotting against you. Everyone's a potential spy, or exactly the right type of plot twist waiting to happen. You can practically feel the paranoia rising in the damp air, thicker than the layer of grime on the walls. What's worse than being sentenced to a slow decay in a stinking dungeon? Realizing that your comrades could be part of the reason for your downfall, whispering secrets and making deals with the devilish guards. In this dog-eat-dog world of medieval imprisonment, trust is a luxury few can afford. The cell smells like desperation and decay, and the darkened corners seem to ooze guilt, suspicion, and maybe a little bit of last night's gruel mixed with regret. As you sit there with those simultaneously despairing and conspiratorial souls around you, the sketches of trust you try to outline become progressively more convoluted. Who's in cahoots with the guards? Who now bears a secret badge of snitch? You find yourself mentally making lists like a human Rolodex of potential traitors. Ever heard of the name game? Here it's less about catchy tunes and more about who you'd cross off the list if this were a medieval reality show. Let's take old Jasper, for example. He's been whispering enough wild theories to fill a bard's ballad. According to him, the guards don't just want to keep the doors locked, they have a hidden agenda of their own. They're in league with the rats, I tell you, he declares, eyes wide with fervour. The rats get daily meals in exchange for the secrets they'll deliver to the guards. Rumour has it that Jasper once tried to sneak a piece of mouldy bread to a particularly portly rat, believing they were allies in the art of freedom. You almost want to laugh, but you don't dare. Who's to say Jasper isn't making some twisted sense? Then there's Margaret, the former baker, whose soft round face has hardened into something like anxiety and fatigue. She's convinced that the guards have a stash of golden pastries hidden somewhere in the dungeon. Do you think they're counting us in loaves? She asks you one dimly lit afternoon. We could be the next thing on the menu. The absurdity of a royal feast featuring disgruntled prisoners does nothing to alleviate the dread but sends a ripple of laughter around the room. It almost feels good to laugh in a place designed to sap your strength. Amid this chaotic delusion, you concoct your master plan. It starts simply. You will subtly but confidently become a figure of influence, a mastermind orchestrating this motley crew of characters in the quest for liberty. You lean in, selling dreams of grandeur. What if we could convince the guards we've all gone mad? You propose, your voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A hearty dose of lunacy may distract them from the fact that we're trying to escape. The enthusiasm in the room sparks momentarily as heads nod eagerly. It reminds you of children listening to bedtime tales, and oddly, It feels like you've tapped into an ancient power. Soon, the air feels electric with potential. Margarets are suddenly planning a madness performance art to confuse the guards. "We will be the greatest act the dungeon has ever seen," she exclaims. You can picture a theatrical display of bizarre behaviour, clinging to the edge of sanity while hoping the guards simply cannot comprehend the wild tale unfolding before them. Old Jasper has already decided to take centre stage with his rat-summoning skills, but soon the laughter dims and the biting weight of reality creeps back in. Just then you hear the jangling of keys, and the realisation hits you hard like a wooden club. It's all a dream treading on a precipice. No amount of conspiracy can change your conditions here. Your world centres around a grim routine. Still, as you watch the glimmer of ideas dash across your companion's eyes, you can't help but feel invigorated. Every whispered theory resonates, a chance to reclaim agency in a place built on helplessness. And maybe, just maybe, the great dungeon conspiracy is the only weapon you have left against despair. So, you lean into it. You allow your imagination to roam free, alluringly decadent mysteries pulling you deeper into this drama, waiting for the light that never truly shines in these shadowy walls. You start to wonder if the weight of this conspiracy is far more powerful than the chains binding you. After all, within the confines of despair, conspiracy blooms, weaving bonds between you and these unlikely brethren, forging hope in the most unexpected places. As you ponder your wishes for freedom, the fantasy of becoming a knight, or perhaps a distant tale of heroism, starts to look pretty bleak. In the grand scheme of things, it's all in the hopes of not becoming a mystery meat case in tomorrow's stew. You've heard whispers from the more cynical inmates about how the last unlucky soul who got executed ended up simmering in some cooking pot. It's the culinary justice, one particularly grim fellow chuckles. Made you think twice about your next meal, didn't it? You're not ready for your face to be the new decorative feature on the dining table of the guards. You start daydreaming. What would your valiant exit look like? Perhaps you'd wield a sword made of rusted metal, striking down the very guards that have trapped you in this damp dungeon. You can almost hear the score of triumphant horns playing in your head as you imagine the glorious uprising. Alas, it's hard to achieve heroism when you can barely lift your spirits, let alone a sword weighed down with dreams of escape. Naturally, the dark truth is that the odds are firmly stacked against you. The guards are as sharp-eyed as hawks, treating every move you make as potential conspiracy. Any time you try to stretch or twist awkwardly in your haystack of a bed, you can practically feel the guards squinting at you like accusing owls. In the distance, a fellow inmate coughs, drawing your attention. He's a larger man, whose threats to storm the guard station had a long time ago fallen flat. Besides, he's still nursing a broken rib from the last time he dared to act like a hero. Not to mention, he somehow thinks shouting at the guards will prompt them to relay your plight in a riveting tale of bravery. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Desperation is coloured with humour when your companions join you in dreaming of freedom. Let's not just plan for escape. Let's envision our triumphant returns, one prisoner suggests, brightening the mood with wild enthusiasm. You can't help but chuckle at the image of yourself, a heroic figure riding into town on a trusty steed, with townsfolk cheering, though you realise your steed might need several miles of hay and a new leg or two. Fantasy. Truly a cruel mistress. But the hope keeps faintly flickering. Someone recounts tales of legendary escapes, how brave souls once found their paths in dangerous dungeons, transforming the darkness into their doorway to freedom. All we need is an epic plan and a knightly heart, he insists. But doesn't that sound amusingly noble from your current position? You can hardly lift your heart from the shackles that weigh you down, and yet hope refuses to budge. You cling to it as if it were a buoy in a sea of despair, and then you wonder if maybe, just maybe, the guards will have a soft spot for a good old-fashioned escape story. Then someone brings up the rumours of treasure hidden beyond these grim walls, the lost golden relics of past prisoners. Your curiosity piqued, you gather around, sharing half-formed plans filled with laughter and excitement. Imagine pulling off a grand heist, one of the younger prisoners muses, eyes twinkling with mischief as if he might just burst into a giddy jig. Meanwhile, you can't help but think of the old tales spun about what lies beyond the gates of gloom. Freedom, fortune, and perhaps even real food. Your stomach rumbles in agreement, though you dismiss it as a disloyal traitor for considering scoundrelly delights over trepidation. Yet the longer you stay here, the more you realise something. Underneath the ragtag, beleaguered group of inmates lies a heart of camaraderie forged by despair. Even in the darkest moments, your fellow prisoners spin stories, breathe hope, and create a bond tighter than any chains that keep you shackled. Who would have thought you'd find camaraderie in a place built for isolation? You might not want to refer to it as family, but perhaps a stout band of misfits isn't so bad. As night looms heavier on your shoulders, this peculiar kinship pulses the tiny light of hope further, however faint it may be. You continuously remind yourself, one day, you might just be able to break free from this dungeon swamp. Or at least, you can keep your hopes up through more than just soup. And with that, the plans of escape turn from mere thoughts into fuel for the fire that keeps the dark at bay. The future may still taste of despair, but it also holds a sprinkle of friendship. So you cling to it as if any moment now you'll burst through that door and reclaim your place among the living, the sane, and those who haven't quite been added to the stew. Trust. That's the new currency in your dungeon existence. Between the whispers of betrayal and the desperate need to share the last of the sandwich that's somehow still edible, it becomes clear that earning a prisoner's trust is as elusive as the air freshener in this place. Watching your fellow inmates is like observing a pack of feral cats. They might seem domesticated, but one wrong look and you're in for a hissing match that could lead to a scratch fight over the remaining crumbs. Imagine the scene. You sit huddled in a dark corner, your stomach growling like a lion that missed breakfast. Across from you is Clem, a gaunt figure with wild hair and a gaze that screams danger. The way he eyes your meagre ration of stale bread, you'd think you were holding the last piece of pizza on a Saturday night. "Hey there, friend," he murmurs, a glint in his eye. "Mind sharing a bit of that scrumptious treat?" And suddenly, sharing feels like an act of reckless abandon. Because you know that if you give him even a crumb, the next thing you know, he'll return the favour by accusing you of planning a prison break while clandestinely sharpening a spoon into a shank. Now, there's old man Gregor on the other side, who's been locked up for what seems like his 7th lifetime. He's the embodiment of trust issues, collecting grim tales like Pokemon cards. "Never trust anyone in here, not even the rats," he warns with a dramatic flourish, waving a bony finger like a prophet in a horror movie. You try to roll your eyes, but his proclamation carries the weight of wisdom gained through grueling years of unpaid labour and questionable dining options. You find yourself nodding along, mentally filing away the lesson that social interaction here is ultimately an exchange of mistrust and bargaining chips. No one's asset is higher than the crust of shared bread. The tension is palpable as you consider your options. Forming alliances, you realise, is a bit like playing chess with jelly. Incredibly messy, bordering on ridiculous, and it inevitably ends with someone getting sticky fingers. Sure, you might forge a bond over lamenting the taste of potentially poisoned pottage, but the moment someone looks at your hunk of bread with a glimmer of intent, you are ready to hit the panic button. And that's not even a real thing in your current situation. You glance around, mentally assessing who has the best chance of knifing you in the back for that last bite. And then there's the issue of prisoner hierarchies, a social ladder that has long since decayed, much like the food. Right at the top is Rufus, the self-appointed king of filth, whose primary skills include giving everyone around him highly unsolicited advice and an abundance of side-eye. Trust no one, he preaches like a cross between a motivational speaker and a failed magician. He's also notorious for hoarding food in his secret stash, which is really just an accumulation of various mouldy items hidden under an equally mouldy blanket. You can practically hear the Flora planning their takeover of the kingdom of Rufus, preparing to stage a coup at the first sign of weakness. The deeper you dive into this trust minefield, the clearer it becomes that even your own instincts must be questioned. Is that kind smile from that quiet inmate real, or just a prelude to an exceptionally sinister plot? Is your laughter with a fellow prisoner a sign of camaraderie, or just a cover for a very real apprehension about who the next unfortunate meal will be? You've reached a level of paranoia that would make even the most seasoned spy feel comfortable. In the end, you decide it's better to play it safe. You smile weakly, nodding at Clem when he asks for a bite, but also clutch your piece of bread like it's your last lifeline, eyes darting around for defense if things go sideways. After all, it's just another day in the medieval dungeon, where trust issues are as deep-rooted as the muck under your fingernails. In this unforgiving pit, you can never be too careful. One moment of weakness could cost you dearly, both in sustenance and in your weary heart's fleeting desires for companionship. As night falls again, you find yourself silently agreeing with old man Gregor's words echoing in your skull. Trust is for fools, and trust among thieves only breeds more thieves in a place already overflowing with desperate souls. You might not have a slice of sunshine and rainbows, but who needs that when you have a firm grasp on the art of survival? After all, you're still here, which counts for something, even if it's just another day headlining the dungeon dilemma. At this point, your only tactic is misdirection. Much like a magician, you'll make everyone forget you're desperately trying to escape, creating distractions such as, "Did you see that rat just shamefully wedged into the wall?" works wonders. Every glance and giggle is a lifeline thrown into the tempest of despair that surrounds you. There's something liberating about steering the attention away from the stench of unwashed bodies and the ticking clock of your own doom. You bravely point at the corner of the dungeon, where a particularly chubby rat has taken up residence, perhaps fulfilling its own questionable ambition of becoming the overlord of filth. It's not exactly the glamour of a knight's quest, but you're making it work. Every day becomes a performance piece of improvisational comedy mixed with existential dread. You've become the bard of the lockup, recounting far-fetched tales of your grand escape plans, only to be met with rolling eyes and sardonic chuckles. "I swear," you say, "I've got a spoon that could tunnel through stone," while simultaneously plotting an escape route that doesn't lead to instant incineration. Imagination. Who knew it could be your greatest ally whilst cohabiting with these despairing stone walls, like being trapped inside a particularly bad medieval sitcom? Now, let's talk about the scenery of your daily entertainment. The dull, eerie rock walls that never change. The faint glow of the flickering torchlight casting shadows that morph into grim spectres as you continue your monologue of nonsense. Your fellow prisoners, eager for some semblance of amusement, lean closer, eyes wide like children around a campfire waiting for the ghost story to reach its thrilling climax. The best part. They're hanging on your every word simply because anything is better than the silence drowning them in existential dread. As you gaze around at the faces of your companions, you notice their expressions fluctuate between skeptical and entertained. They get it. They understand that laughter, however fleeting, becomes the only balm for the misery that peeks through the cracks of this brutish reality. They might be questioning why a grown adult is pretending to foster a friendship with a rodent, but that's necessary for survival. You know the secret. It's easier to craft camaraderie from disaster than to confront the grim truth directly. But let's slow down for a moment. You're stealthily planting seeds of improbability in your audience. Over the course of the day, even the rats seem committed to your newest scheme. Why not fashion a daring heist to steal a key? I bet if I convince the rattus over there to help me charm our way to freedom, all that hay will be a memory. You gesture dramatically, casting doubt on the idea that these rats are actually plotting a coup against you. You're creating a narrative that somehow may compel your fellow inmates to join in this ridiculous fantasy. You've transformed more mundane moments into comical interludes as well. Who would have thought that every guard shares a common passion for three-legged stool races, you ask, only to bust out an exaggerated impression of the guards jockeying for position. The theatrics could win you awards if only there were a group of royalty to judge. The laughter multiplies like rabbits as your fellow inmates find the absurdity soothing. Every chuckle is like sugar in your gruel. It helps you swallow the reality of your circumstances. When the mood begins to darken and discussions slowly shift to the macabre, you intervene. Let's not talk about what happens if we don't make it out. Instead, how about we plan our very own film crew, chronicling this dungeon life for a medieval blockbuster? Catchy title, anyone? But moments of joy are fleeting, and reality claws its way back in. Torn between comedy and the gnawing fear of starvation, you become keenly aware of the bleak future that could loom just around the corner. Each new day blurs into the next, like a washed-out painting that used to be vibrant. Who knew the human spirit could be so resilient yet so utterly defeated in the same breath? Yet here you are, surviving not just physically, but mentally, proving that laughter really is the best medicine, or at least a decent anaesthetic against the agonizing reality of life in a medieval dungeon. So, lean into that misdirection. Erect a petty kingdom of nonsense too grand to conquer, but just real enough to keep your sanity from blurring into oblivion. Because when life hands you the cold, hard truth about your situation, an exaggerated story about rodents taking over might just be the escape plan you need to maintain your dignity within those stone prison walls. Finally, it's time to sit back and reflect. As you lay among the staleness and chaos, you can't help but chuckle at your own tragedy. Here you are, with a cozy group of fellow misfits whose lives contribute to your experience, however strange that may be. You share a bond through the muck and gloom that's almost poetically romantic in its absurdity. It's the kind of camaraderie that only builds while rubbing shoulders, quite literally, with the downtrodden and the disgraced. You glance around at your fellow inmates and can't help but think, these must be the medieval misfits. Next to you, a man who insists he's a noble caught in a case of mistaken identity is sporadically shouting about reinstating his family name while desperately trying to remove a flea from his beard. Meanwhile, another prisoner claims he can predict the weather by the number of rats scurrying through the night. You snicker quietly, half amused, half wondering if he's actually onto something. Maybe the fate of kingdoms rides on furry little tails. With so much despair, you almost forget how dire the situation truly is. You take a moment to consider how much you've grown fond of the chaos, the sounds of grumbling bellies turning into accidental symphonies, the eerie echo of the damp stone, and the almost comforting familiarity of scampering feet in the walls, which might or might not belong to rats. It's like a bustling neighbourhood out there, if your neighbourhood were populated by the most disgruntled creatures imaginable. You can't help but giggle at the notion that life outside these walls, where people worried about what colour their tapestries were, seemed so silly by comparison. In here, your biggest concern is choosing between mouldy bread and the dust that might become your roommate if you don't hurry up and decide on either. It's the ultimate survival of the fittest situation. What's the meaning of a life when your daily goal is to outwit the person who wants to use your tunic for a pillow? Beyond the laughter and absurdities, you start examining the strange yet poignant lessons this dungeon offers. What is it really to endure? You've learned that true bonding doesn't begin with shared interest but mutual suffering. You reflect on the life lessons imparted by your fellow inmates, particularly the frail old woman who swears she can knit a sweater out of nothing but despair and stale hopes. Her knitting needles may be little more than splinters from the crumbling walls, yet she works with the gentle determination of a true artist. In a surprising way, she is the embodiment of resilience, tirelessly crafting something from nothing. You take note of the unusual alliances forming around you. Was it always this way? Perhaps. It seems that life and death reveal the core of humanity in ways comfort and leisure never can. Those who once might have been enemies strike unexpected bargains driven by their sheer need for survival, bartering bits of food for a kind word or some gossip that might elevate them above the brink of madness. Here, your identity becomes blurred with every shared laugh, whispered secret, or offered crumb of stale bread. As you reflect on the helplessness all around you, you oddly find a sense of empowerment in the madness. Here you are, more easily able to connect with the simplest of pleasures, a shared joke, a fleeting moment of hope, or even the ridiculous notion that dungeons could be cosy. After all, who imagined despair could foster creativity and compassion? Yet, amid these newfound bonds, you must not ignore the creeping fear. Will the day come when you're all separated? You shudder at the thought of solitude, of returning to being just another nameless soul, the mere whisper of a forgotten life. The potential for the guillotine, or worse, being served as a humanoid stew, interjects moments of clarity amidst the absurdity. Almost as if on cue, the distant sound of clanking swords reminds you that life can turn from laughter to despair quicker than a guard scuffling by. And that's the delightful chaos you thrive in. A painful dance through filth, humour, and camaraderie. Welcome to the tapestry of medieval life, where laughter, loss, and rich, uncomfortable friendships intertwine like threads in a tattered banner. For now, though, you choose to laugh. You embrace the chaos and let it linger, hoping tomorrow will unfurl with more bizarre adventures in this downtrodden and literally stinky slice of existence.